bring you greetings from the Trade Union Congress. I work for the Labor Research and Policy Institute, and we conducted a study in 2010, precisely from March to December 2010, on wages and working conditions of journalists in Ghana. And somebody may ask, why journalists? We have two reasons for choosing journalists to do this research on. The first is for us to uplift the standard of journalism in the country, and also precisely because it's part of our objective as a trade union congress to ensure that working conditions of every worker is improved in the country. In our research in 2010, we realized we had over 900 print media, precisely news, papers, magazines, and others. We had over 272 broadcast media, made up of 217 FM stations and 55 television stations. We are in 2017, and I expect the numbers to have changed. We realized that 72% of the FM stations that were operating in Ghana are privately owned and not publicly owned. Others were waiting to have their frequency to air. In terms of methodology, we sampled using a random sampling. I don't need to go into details into that. But we used a questionnaire. We circulated 1,000 questionnaires across the entire country. We retrieved 716 of that, which is 72%. And we thought it was good to make, general conclusions. Therefore, the results from the report are based on the 716 journalists who responded to our questionnaire. In terms of the geographical distribution of the respondents, we had about 20%, that's about 104 of the respondents from Western Region and Greater Accra. I don't know why Western Region and Greater Accra, but they came up with the highest respondents. Greater Accra, of course, because it's the capital. And we also had a little over 14% from Ashanti, and then the rest were distributed equally across the country. In terms of wages, as trade unions, we are interested in wages. After all, it's the reason why we work. We realized that average wage then among the media workers who responded was just 200 Ghana cedi. Average wage was 200 Ghana cedi. And brothers and sisters, the minimum wage then in 2010 was 84 Ghana cedi, equivalent to $2. Minimum wage, monthly minimum wage. And we realized that about 10% of journalists who responded to us were earning below the minimum wage. 10%. It might be small, in terms of 10%, but it's a violation. Minimum wage has moved from 84 Ghana cedi monthly to about 261 Ghana cedi currently, which is about $58. And I can bet you there are many journalists who are earning below that currently. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. We also realized that the media landscape is made up of very youthful people, young people. The average wage from our study was 34 years. So these are young people. Perhaps it explains the reason why their working conditions are also not too good. Perhaps. We realized that most of our respondents were single. In fact, 53% were not married. But we had about 45% who were married. We realized that average age in those in the private media was about 31 years, and that of the public media was about 38 years. In terms of wages, we also realized that the males were earning a bit more than the females. The males were earning averagely 203 Ghana cedi. Okay. We said the average was 200. Males were earning about 203 Ghana cedi. Okay, I'll skip some of them. We don't need all that. Now, another worrying trend is that even if you look at wages and educational status of the respondents, you realize that even people with degree and postgraduates, some of them were even earning below the minimum wage. It was a bit worrying. For instance, there was about 5% of people who reported that they were degree holders or postgraduate holders who were earning below the 84 Ghana cedi that I mentioned earlier. But that notwithstanding, the report tells us that the higher your educational status, the more you earn, which is, standard globally. Again, we realize that with journalists who had permanent employment status, their wages were about 280 Ghana cedi on average, compared to those who were on casual status or temporal status or part-time status. For instance, for part-time status, the average was 100 Ghana cedi then. In other words, the Labor Act tells us that if somebody is employed continuously for 6 months, the person needs to have a permanent employment status. I don't know if that's what is happening in the media. In terms of wages per sector, the study came up with the conclusion that those in the public sector were earning better than those in the private sector.
Yes.
Okay. Precisely, the average for those in the public sector was 306 Ghana cedi. And those in the private sector, the average was 250 Ghana cedi. So there's a huge difference in there. Okay. Now, we also came up with some direct quotes from people about their wages, from journalists, direct quotes. Somebody said, "My salary is woefully inadequate. My salary is very small to support my family and even myself. My salary compared to my other colleagues at other sectors is too low. It's woefully insufficient and is demoralizing." Now, apart from wages, as unions, we are also interested in the benefits of members or workers. If we talk about benefits, we have the statutory benefits and then the non-statutory benefits. In terms of statutory benefits, we can talk about the social security contribution, your paid leave, your sick leave, the maternity leave for women. These are statutory. But unions have gone beyond the statutory to also fight for other benefits, like subsidy for transport, uniforms and all that, accommodation and all that. Those are non-statutory. So let's take the statutory benefits for media workers. In terms of social security contribution, we are journalists and we all know the new act, the Pension Act 766 of 2008, which comes in 3 tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and tier 1, tier 2 are mandatory. In tier 1, the employer is supposed to contribute 13% of basic, and you and I as employees are supposed to contribute 5.5, making 18.5. And in this deduction, 13.5 is supposed to go to SNET, of which 2.5 goes to NHIS, and the rest is managed by SNET. And the remaining goes into your second tier. What did we find about the journalists? It was good. 51% said they had access to Social Security. 51. Telling you that 49 do not have access, which is worrying. So we are working and our employers are not paying our Social Security. We were saying that we don't retire as journalists, but we need to look at our Social Security conditions as well, because we cannot be working forever. And if 41% of our people, even if it's 2%, is worrying. We realized that there were more males who had access compared to females. Maybe the females, we don't complain too much. So 54% of males had their contributions going, and 45% of females had their contributions going. Again, the public media was outstanding compared to the private media. Again, we realized that media houses who have unions had their contributions going compared to those without unions. In terms of paid annual leave, it's important we take rest. We don't need to work every day. That is why the Labor Act has made provision that in one calendar year, you should take at least 15 days off to rest, at least 15 days off. Again, the Labor Act, precisely Section 24, asks that sick leave should not be part of the annual leave. Okay? We can be sick at any time. What did we find? We realized that 72% of journalists who responded, the 716 people, did not have access to annual leave. Journalists, you work too much. And even for the quarter, the 25% who had access, they were, again, more females than males. Okay. And then again, the public thing still comes in. In terms of sick leave, we realized that there were more males who had sick leave compared to females. Maybe the females, we take very good care of ourselves so we don't get sick often compared to our male counterparts. Okay. Now, in terms of maternity leave, the law, again, the Labor Act, precisely Section 57, is telling us that the moment a pregnant woman, on production of evidence from a medical practitioner or a midwife indicating the expectant date to be confinement, is entitled to at least 12 working weeks. That's about 3 months, right? And even now, most of you know that we are trying to get 5 months maternity leave, yes. Yes, the trade union is pushing hard for that. Okay, but even the law asks that there should be 2 additional weeks in case the woman has twins. Yes. Okay, or is granted some complications. There'll be 2 additional weeks. But I'm telling you, in the scope of journalism, this is not, encouraging. What did we find? Only a quarter, let me say 26%, that's about 26% of women had access to maternity leave, which is worrying. And we realized that in the private sector, it was just 7% compared to 18% for the public media house. In terms of paid steady leave, now I'm going to the non-statutory benefits. Paid steady leave. We said that in many organizations, these incentives are provided to upgrade the skills and knowledge of, the employees. And in such a situation, we all know what steady leave is. You take your salary, but again, you can attend school to upgrade your skills. Let me say that for the study, what we found was that just about 16% of journalists had access to steady leave. As practitioners, you can tell whether the report is right or wrong. Again, we realize that the public-private thing is still there, so maybe it's about time the private media learns something from the public media. In terms of medical care, some institutions offer medical care to staff. At least, even if you attend and you come, they will reimburse you based on some investigations they do. Only 20% of your members had access to such a facility. And let me also add that some of these non-statutory benefits are in the collective bargaining agreement. So it's when you have unions that you can fight for some of this. In terms of training, this morning the president mentioned the need for training. I must say that in our study, we found that in the scope of journalism, training was very encouraging. We had 62% of your members who said they had benefited directly from training that was paid by the employer. And we thought this is encouraging because if you compare to the national average, it's just 3%. So for 62% of your members saying that they've benefited from training, we think this is encouraging and something that should be continued. I'll be done soon. In terms of working conditions, so we've talked about the statutory, all the other things. Now let's go to the working conditions. When we talk about working conditions as unions, we mean your working hours. We are talking about your overtime payments. We are talking about your employment contracts. And then we are talking about your job satisfaction level. Okay. Again, all this have their roots from the Labor Act. Okay. Okay. So it means I wouldn't wait because we already know the story, so I wouldn't wait. Okay. So we are saying that in the Labor Act, you are supposed to work for 40 hours a week, 8 hours per day. But what we found was that it wasn't that too bad, but at least we found that about half of your members said they work 9 hours a day instead of the 8 hours, which translates into 45 hours a week. But I know if we had gone much into details, the story would have been different, because I know you work, and it comes with so much risk. And it has an impact on your leave as well, because you realize at the leave side, most of you were not going. So it translates into your working hours. So you work more. In terms of overtime, the Labor Act is again clear that when you undertake any work, okay, outside your normal working hours, you are supposed to be paid an overtime allowance. And again, overtime is not supposed to be compelled unless you are in an establishment in which, if you don't do the overtime, you can cause somebody's life or production process can cease or something. Say a medical doctor, if you're operating and you have to work 8 hours and you need to do your operation, you can't say you are stopping because 8 hours has come. You need to continue. So there are some areas, but journalism is not part of those areas. So please demand your overtime if you are not paid. Now, it's not supposed to be compelled, but again, we realize that 81% of your respondents do overtime, and 42% said they do it, not voluntarily. They are compelled to do this overtime, 42%. All right. And 33%, those who are compelled to do, 33% are saying that they are not paid the overtime that they do. Okay. But as unions, we are saying this is a breach, okay? It's a significant breach of the law and a violation to the rights of the journalist.
Ignore the high table, they are our employers.
Okay, now let's look at the contract of employment. Again, Section 2.1 of the Labor Act. In fact, the Labor Act should be our Bible as workers. Every employment of a worker by an employer who are on the high table for a period of 6 months or more in a given year shall be secured with employment contracts, spelling out all the terms and conditions. 54% of journalists do not have employment contracts. And for such workers, we are saying that the relationship between the employer and the employee is then regulated by an unwritten contract, right? Which means the person can be sacked anytime. You can lose your job at any time. All right? And also, why you can't be paid your overtime? Because you've not negotiated for it in your contract. Yes. But again, we realized that there were more males who had contract than females. As I said, the females maybe because we just decided to take things the way they are. So let's go to trade union density as far as journalists are concerned. Again, in the Labor Act and in the Constitution, there's freedom of association and expression. You have the right to form or join any union. 2 or more people can form a union. 44%, okay, of the media houses we went had trade unions in place. That's encouraging, 44%. It's okay. But we realized that 32% belong to trade unions. The fact that there's union doesn't mean you belong to the union. Okay, but there are free riding issues here. People who don't belong can still enjoy when the unions negotiate. But as we say, unya asema na obi. Okay. In terms of collective bargaining agreement, the document that contains our working conditions and everything between the employer and the employee, usually for a period of 2 years, subject to renewal. But for wages, every year is renewal. You renew wages in your collective agreement. We realize that the proportion of respondents who are covered by CBAs, the collective agreement, was about 45%. Okay, which is a bit higher than those who said they belong to union. So it tells you the free riding thing that I spoke about. So there are people who are enjoying, collective bargaining. But in terms of compliance, it's one thing having the CBA and another thing ensuring compliance of the CBA. In terms of compliance, we realize that my time is almost up. Don't worry, I'll end soon. We realize that in terms of compliance, we still have a lot more to do. Okay. You had more than half of the respondents saying that their management partially complies with the CBA. We think it's worrying. CBAs must be complied with. Whether journalists feel that they are adequately compensated for the efforts they put in or for their labor, 81% said no. So to the conclusions, we are saying that, of course, we've mentioned all this denial of that. But more importantly, we are saying that it's a cause for worry. For instance, if we had 81% saying they are not satisfied in terms of compensation for the job they do, and given the important role that journalists play in this country, then it becomes, an issue. Because if such workers, I don't know if we can, if some may say, how can we rely on somebody who is not happy about the job that he or she is doing in terms of reporting the wrongdoings in the society? So we are saying that working conditions in terms of public-private, we've realized that it's better in terms of in public compared to private. Working conditions in terms of those who are having union is better than those who don't have union. We are not saying that by paying journalists well or by ensuring that their working conditions are improved will necessarily ensure that the standard of journalism is improved. We are not saying that. That's not what the study is saying. We believe that if we do this, in addition to the training that we are already doing, which is encouraging, coupled with some monitoring and regulation, we believe that the standard of journalism will be better.